Hello and welcome to Larry Has Opinions. One of the most polarizing books on the Booker Prize shortlist this year has to be No One Is Talking About This by Patricia Lockwood. This seems to trigger pretty strong feelings in both people who really love this book and people who really hate it with a passion. I have to say that when I first heard of this book, I was really uninterested. I heard about it and I really thought, oh, this sounds really gimmicky, really not for me, not one I'm ever going to read. And then I kept hearing about it more and more, and eventually I succumbed to the power of marketing and I convinced myself that I was really going to like it. So I decided to pick it up. In case you haven't heard of it, which is possible, this essentially follows an influencer who is really into this portal, which is essentially Twitter, and it really captures the essence of the meme culture and the Twitter culture that is quite significant in the internet. And the first part of the book is just sort of mundane and really follows her life and her thoughts on the portal and things happening in the portal and the way she's traveling around the world and so on. And then the second half of the book is more focused on something that happens in her own personal life. So the story shifts somewhat. And one of the kind of most peculiar thing about the book, I guess, is how it's all written in sort of vignettes or snippets, if you like, to kind of mimic the style of Twitter, I suppose, where you just scroll endlessly and you follow these out of context thoughts that people put out, and it really mimics some of the same feelings as well that you might have when you're just scrolling on Twitter or other social media, for instance, where you just have things that you don't really know what they refer to, and you might spend more of your attention on it to figure it out, or you might just scroll on. And the way it reads is somewhat similar in the book. There are all these thoughts that can be quite jarring in a way, because you're not necessarily sure if what you're reading refers to the previous vignette or if it's completely separate or if it's completely out of context. Some are really trivial and some might be quite a lot deeper. So I thought it was really clever the way it's done it. And one of the things that I really liked is how this is some sort of auto-fiction in a way. So the main character, from what I gather, is sort of close to Patricia Lockwood herself. She was really big still is, I guess, big on Twitter, and she has a really strong following, and a lot of the humor that the main character has is probably Lockwood's humor as well. And I believe that even some of the personal anecdotes that are relayed in some of the book actually happened to Lockwood herself. So this really feels like a book that is about the internet, but is also written by someone who is very much part of that culture. And it's not just like some old person's rant about the old generation, they're all online, they have short attention span. This is, in a way, almost a love letter and taking the piss about your own subculture sort of book, which I really appreciated and I quite liked. I have to say that a lot of the memes that are referred to in the book, they somewhat go over my head. Some I recognized, but I would say the reading experience is really enhanced if you refer to some of the articles online that you can easily find, where you can just see all the memes that she's referring to. And some of them you'll probably recognize after you see them. You can, oh yeah, I remember how 5 years ago everyone was talking about this, or a specific in-joke or anything like that. And I think that really helps with the reading experience, because some of these jokes, in-jokes, they can be quite niche and quite difficult to appreciate unless you remember what they were talking about. So as I was saying, I really enjoyed this part of the book where it's a really good description of this part of the internet culture. And again, I wouldn't necessarily say that the book is talking about the internet as a whole, but rather about that specific subculture within the internet, which is very significant. It's very big, but obviously it's not the whole of the internet. And this portal really sounds like Twitter, really. I always like to know as little as possible about the books that I pick up, but in this case, I had already heard quite a few things about it. So I already knew that it was composed of these two parts, where the first part is more about the internet culture, a bit more mundane in tone, and then the second part was a lot more serious and personal. But I actually was expecting something massively different between the two parts, because this narrative about the two books in one had already been sold to me so much that I was expecting something radically different between the two parts. For once, for instance, I didn't realize that the second part is still all told in the same vignette style as the first half. For some reason, I had come to expect that the second half was more like a traditional novel, which is really not. And also I had heard a lot of people either saying they love the first part and not the second, or not like the first part, but they like the second. And I have to say, for me, even though the tone, or not really the tone, but the subject of the book really shifts between the online bit to the personal stuff on the second half of the book, I have to say that the tone and the structure of the book to me felt still quite similar, even though probably because I was come to expect them to be very different. Whereas the same type of humor that I quite enjoyed in the first half was still continuing in the second half. And even where this personal story, these dramatic events that happen in her family life kind of take center stage in the story, it is still very much infused with this Twitter vibes, if you like, which I found really interesting to see how she essentially managed to merge these two cultures. And I think a lot of people saying, and the point of the book is to show how the personal stuff is more important than the internet. And I really that wasn't really my take on the book. And while I agree that it clearly shows that the dramatic events in the second half takes more of a center stage and makes some of the issues in the first half of the book seem quite trivial, which I kind of enjoyed the way she was a little bit taking the piss of the fact that you have all these people on Twitter really thinking that they make a massive contribution in the world because of their tweets and because of the way they discuss social justice or economic systems, or all of these things. They think their contribution to the world is so significant because they tweet about it. I really enjoy that that sort of undertone to it, and especially coming from someone who's part of that world. So I was saying that it clearly shows how some of that becomes a bit trivial. But on the other hand, I really felt that it shows how it's really difficult to separate the two halves of the book, because the style, the tone, the humor, and the structure of the first half very much carries on in the second half of the book, which was very interesting. I think it would have been a lot more obvious and cliche if she had done what I was sort of expecting, so a very traditional second half of the novel. Whereas I quite enjoyed the fact that the second half of the novel was still very online, still very Twitter-like. And I think the point there is not necessarily that, if you have dramatic event, all the online stuff disappears. And I didn't read it like that at all. I really felt like she was making the point that you can't really separate that, and that sort of narrative about our online lives are ever present even when something really dramatic happens to you. One of the things that I really, really loved was the humor. I have to say that it's a really dry, really dark, really meme sort of humor, and I quite liked it. Even in the second half of the book, where some of the really dramatic stuff happens, there's some of these moments that really made me laugh out loud, and I was necessarily not expecting, especially in the dramatic moments that take place. So aside from all these things that I enjoyed and all these sides of the story and the humor that I really appreciated, I also very much like how this is something different. Whether you enjoy it or not, I think there's no denying that it's doing something that hasn't really been done or not done many times before. Obviously, there are a lot of books about the internet and internet culture in general, but the way it's been executed, married up with the type of story being told, I think it's very original, and I can see why he's made the Women's Prize shortlist and the Booker Prize shortlist, because it's something different, something new. Whether you like it or not, that's a different matter. But I quite enjoyed the originality of it and how it's coming from someone who actually appreciates and is part of that culture, and not as someone who just spouting some cliches about the internet, how it's all bad and it's all negative. It's just showing some nuance and the kind of the good side and the bad side in a way about it. So after all this, you might think, oh, I really love this book, but that wasn't actually quite the case. I have to say that the structure of the book perhaps, and also the episode that happens in the second half, is not something I could quite relate or that really resonated with me. I was expecting something really punchy, and to me felt somewhat flat. It's quite possible that other people might relate more to what's happening in the book and perhaps feel more of an involvement with the story. In my case, it was more of a rational appreciation for what the book is doing, but I didn't necessarily feel that emotional involvement that other books make me feel. And for that reason, the story felt somewhat flat for me, I have to say. So even though this seems to be a really polarizing book with some people really, really loving it and some people really, really hating it, I think I fall somewhere in the middle, actually, where I really appreciated and enjoyed to some extent what the book is doing. However, I didn't really necessarily find the story particularly engaging for my taste. But on the other hand, I would not agree with all these people saying, oh, it's rubbish, it's just waste of time. I thought it was really clever in the way it's executed. So for all these reasons, my rating for the book is 8 out of 10. I hope you guys like this video. Please give me a thumbs up. If you want to discuss this book or any other with our community, join our Discord. The link is in the description box. And I'll see you the next time.